Welcome to Sports Live Media on YouTube. It's your guy Sports Live broadcasting live today, July 18th, 2025. We are going to do the Major League Baseball themed stream, my perspective, and these games are for today, July 18th, 2025. It'll include today, tomorrow, which is the July 19th, and Sunday, July 20th of 2025. Can y'all hear me out there in YouTube land? Again, if you're just joining me for this broadcast, thank you very much for joining me for this live broadcast today on Sports Live Media. We're going to go over today who is playing in the Major League Baseball games for each day in question. I'll then go over the starting pitcher, any other pertinent information that I can find, and then I will go over my picks for who I think will win the baseball games today, Saturday and Sunday. So with that in mind, let's get started with this, shall we? We'll start with the Major League Baseball games that are scheduled for today. You have Boston versus Chicago, 1:20 p.m. Central Time. Lucas Giolito versus Colin Ray. The over-under is 9, or 8.5 or 9, and the money line has Chicago at minus 135. Okay, in that game, or what I'll do is I'll go over the pertinent information and then I'll make my picks. So you have the Chicago White Sox next versus Pittsburgh. That game will be at 5:40 p.m. You have Jonathan Cannon versus Bailey Falter. You have the over-under at 8.5 or 9, and the money line is Pittsburgh minus 160. You have the Los Angeles Angels versus Philadelphia, which will be undecided versus Jesus Luzardo. Over-under is 8.5 or 9. Philadelphia is got the money line minus 200. You have San Diego versus Washington, which will be Dylan Cease versus Michael Soroka. Let's see, the over-under is over 8.5 or 9. San Diego's got the money line with minus 160. That game is at 5:45 p.m. today, Central. You have next is San Francisco versus Toronto. That game will start at 6:07 p.m. You have Justin Verlander versus Chris Bassett. The over/under is 8.5 or 9. The Toronto has the money line at minus 135. You have Cincinnati versus the New York Mets. 6:10 p.m. Nick Lodolo versus Sean Mania. You have the over-under at 8.5 or 9. You have the money line with the New York Mets minus 165. You have next game is Kansas City versus Miami. You have undecided versus Sandy Alcantara. That game's at 6:10 p.m. tonight. Let's see, the over-under is 7.5 or 8. You have Kansas City with the money line at minus 125. You have next game is going to be Cleveland versus the Athletics. J.P. Sears versus Slade Ciccone. The over/under is 8.5 or 9, and you have Cleveland with minus 130 as the money line. You have New York Yankees today playing Atlanta. That game's at 6:15 p.m. Central. You have undecided versus Spencer Strider. They don't have any over-under information on that, but the money line is the New York Yankees minus 115. Okay, you have Baltimore versus Tampa Bay. You have Charlie Morton versus Taj Bradley, 6:35 p.m. Central Time. The over-under is 8.5 or 9, and the money line is Tampa Bay minus 125. Then you have Detroit versus Texas at 7:05 p.m. with Reese Olson versus Patrick Corbin. That game's at 7:05 p.m. You have the over/under at 8.5 or 9. You have Detroit with the money line at minus 120. You have Minnesota versus Colorado at 7:40 p.m. with Chris Paddock versus Kyle Freeland. Let's see, the over-under is 10.5 or 11. The money line is Minnesota minus 165. Next, you'll have St. Louis versus Arizona, which starts at 8:40 p.m. Central. Andre Paliante versus Brandon Pafat. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that right. No over-under, but Arizona has the money line at minus 130. You have the next game at Houston versus Seattle, which will be at 9:10 p.m. Central. You have Brandon Walter versus Luis Castillo. You have the over-under at 7.5 or 8. The money line is Seattle with minus 135. And you have Milwaukee versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. Undecided versus Tyler Glasnow. No over-under. The Los Angeles Dodgers is minus 185. Alright, now for my picks for that game. In Boston versus the Chicago Cubs, I have Chicago Cubs, and I'm going to go over the 9. Chicago White Sox versus Pittsburgh, I have Pittsburgh over the 9. Los Angeles Angels versus Philadelphia, the over-under is 9. I'm going to go over on the 9. San Diego versus Washington, I have San Diego defeating Washington, and I'll go over on the 9. San Francisco versus Toronto, I have San Francisco winning that game, and I'm going to go under the 9. No, I'm going to go over the 9, I'm sorry. Over the 9. Next, I have Cincinnati, Cincinnati versus the New York Mets. I have Cincinnati winning that one, and I'm going to go over the 9. Kansas City versus Miami, I have Miami to win that one, and I'm going to go over the 8. The Athletics versus Cleveland, I have Cleveland winning that one, and I'm going to go over the 9. New York Yankees versus Atlanta, I have the New York Yankees winning that one. No information on the over-under. On the Baltimore-Tampa Bay game, I have Baltimore winning that one and over the 9. Let's see, Detroit versus Texas. I have Texas defeating Detroit, and I'm going to go over the 9. Minnesota versus Colorado. I have Colorado winning that one, but it's going to be under the 11. St. Louis versus Arizona. I have St. Louis winning. Even though Arizona's favored, I'm going to go St. Louis on this one. Houston versus Seattle. I have Seattle winning that one, and I'm going to go over the 8. Milwaukee versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. I have Milwaukee beating the Los Angeles Dodgers, and that's on that one. So for the games for Saturday and Sunday, I'll just have who the games are and who the starting pitchers are. I do not have money line or over-under for the games on Saturday and Sunday, so we'll just proceed with that, knowing that information. So for Saturday, we have San Francisco versus Toronto, 2:07 p.m., undecided versus Eric Lauer. Cincinnati versus the New York Mets, Nick Martinez versus Clay Holmes, 3:10 p.m. Central. Kansas City versus Miami, 3:10 p.m. Central. Undecided versus Cal Quantrill. The Los Angeles Angels versus Philadelphia, undecided versus Tajuan Walker, 5:05 p.m. Central. The Chicago White Sox versus Pittsburgh, 5:40 p.m. Adrian Hauser versus Mike Burrows. San Diego versus Washington, 5:45 p.m. Yu Darvish versus Mitchell Parker. Baltimore versus Tampa Bay, 6:05 p.m. Central Time. Dean Creamer versus Zach Littell. Detroit versus Texas, 6:05 p.m. Undecided versus Kumar Rocker. The Athletics versus Cleveland, 6:10 p.m. Central Time. Luis Severino versus Logan Allen. The New York Yankees versus Atlanta, 6:15 p.m. Undecided versus Joey Wentz. I have Boston versus Chicago Cubs, 6:15 p.m. Brian Bello versus Shota Imanaga. St. Louis versus Arizona, 6:15 p.m. Sonny Gray versus Ryan Nelson. Minnesota versus Colorado, 7:10 p.m. Undecided versus Antonio Senzatella. Milwaukee versus Los Angeles Dodgers, undecided versus Emmett Sheehan, 8:10 p.m. Central Time. Houston versus Seattle, 8:40 p.m. Lance McCullers Jr. versus Logan Evans. So now, here's my picks for the games on Saturday, July 19th. In San Francisco versus Toronto, I have Toronto defeating San Francisco. Cincinnati loses to the New York Mets. Miami defeats Kansas City. Philadelphia defeats the Los Angeles Angels. Pittsburgh defeats Chicago White Sox. Washington will defeat San Diego. Tampa Bay defeats Baltimore. Texas will defeat Detroit. Cleveland will defeat the Athletics. Atlanta will defeat the New York Yankees. Chicago Cubs will defeat Boston. Arizona will defeat St. Louis. Colorado defeats Minnesota. Los Angeles Dodgers will defeat Milwaukee. And let's see, Seattle will defeat Houston. So now we have the games coming up for Sunday, July 20th of 2025. You have San Francisco versus Toronto, 11:05 a.m. Central Time. That'll be Undecided versus Jose Barrios. You have Baltimore versus Tampa Bay, 11:10 a.m. Central. Trevor Rogers versus Ryan Pepiot. The Los Angeles Angels versus Philadelphia, 12:35 p.m. Undecided versus Ranger Suarez. You have Chicago White Sox versus Pittsburgh, 12:35 p.m. Aaron Savale versus Andrew Haney. You have the New York Yankees versus Atlanta, which will be Undecided versus Grant Holmes. You have San Diego versus Washington, which will be Nick Pivetta versus Mackenzie Gore. You have Cincinnati versus the New York Mets, which will be 12:40 p.m. Central Time. Andrew Abbott versus David Peterson. Kansas City versus Miami, 12:40 p.m. Undecided versus Jansen Junk. The Athletics versus Cleveland, 12:40 p.m. Central. Jeffrey Springs versus Gavin Williams. You have Boston versus the Chicago Cubs at 1:20 p.m. Garrett Crochet versus Undecided. You have Minnesota versus Colorado, 2:10 p.m. Undecided versus Herman or German Marquez. You have Houston versus Seattle, 3:10 p.m. Framber Valdez versus Undecided. You have Milwaukee versus Los Angeles, 3:10 p.m. Central Time. Undecided versus Clayton Kershaw. You have St. Louis versus Arizona, 3:10 p.m. Miles McCollus versus Merrill Kelly. And Detroit versus Texas at 6:10 p.m. Tariq Skubal versus Nathan Eovaldi. Now, here's my picks for the games on Sunday, July 20th. San Francisco will defeat Toronto. Baltimore will defeat Tampa Bay. Los Angeles will defeat Philadelphia. Chicago White Sox will defeat Pittsburgh. New York Yankees will defeat Atlanta. San Diego will beat Washington. The New York Mets will lose to Cincinnati. Kansas City will defeat Miami. The Athletics will defeat Cleveland. Boston will defeat the Chicago Cubs. Minnesota will beat Colorado. Houston will defeat Seattle. Milwaukee will defeat the Los Angeles Dodgers. St. Louis will defeat Arizona, and Detroit will defeat Texas. So again, just a quick summary of everything. I've now made my picks for who I think is going to win the games. So let's review one last time. For Friday, with the information that I have,